Welcome back to coin number 8 of the historical coinage series. Today we will look at the Quadrigatus Didrachm from 241 to 235 BC. All right, the coins that come after this one are going to be originals. This is, again, a museum copy of a didrachm from 241 to 235 BC. This is the first coin of our series that finds us now in Rome, in the Roman Empire. Now, if you've been here for the previous episodes, we talked about drachmas and their weights, what their silver content, what it may have been at the time, their purchasing power. Now, this coin is a didrachm, which means it would have been 2 drachmas in worth. The coin weighed about 6.8 grams, or 6 scruples, which was consistent with the weight of the southern Italian Greek didrachmas. Now here's some information on this particular coin. The mint, Rome, and on the obverse you will see the head of Mars facing the right, wearing a crested helmet. Now the reverse shows a bridled head of a horse facing the right, and you can see a sickle to the left of the horse, and that's that little image you see there. Below you read ROMA, the word for Rome, R-O-M-A, in relief below the horse. Some notes on this coin. This is the first drachma issued at Rome. It was part of a multi-denominational issue that was struck following the First Punic War. This issue consisted of silver didrachmas and drachmas and bronze litri, all with the same obverse and reverse types, and was the third silver issue at Rome. The didrachmas and litri are relatively common today, but the drachmas are very rare. In his 1989 article, AIIN, A. Burnett noted 27 examples from 4 obverse and 4 reverse dies. So that gives you an idea of why we have to deal with a museum copy, because again, an authentic specimen of this coin might be prohibitively expensive for yours truly to obtain and show you here on the channel. Now I've got some images pulled up and I'll share them of some originals. We'll take a look at those. But let's keep learning about this particular coin and some Roman Republican currency. Now this is an introduction of Greek-style silver coinage to the Roman Empire. You know that everyone talks about the Greco-Roman, Magna Graecia. There was a lot of overlap, a lot of borrowing, if you will, of the Romans borrowing from Greek culture. Now the Greek-style struck bronze coins were produced in small quantity with the inscription, I don't know how to pronounce it, but it looks like a P, an omega symbol, an M, an A, an I, another omega symbol, and an N. And this was around 300 BC. Only a handful of examples exist today. They're believed to have been produced on behalf of Rome by Neapolis, based on the similar style and weight with Neapolis's own coinage, Hello Kitty, and used to facilitate trade in the wake of the construction of the Appian Way, started in 312 BC. I've walked on the Appian Way and I did not know that it was started in 312 BC. Impressive. Rome entered into a war against Tarentum in 281 BC. The Tarentines enlisted the support of Pyrrhus and Epirus. It was in this context that Rome produced its first Greek-style silver didrachma, with the head of Mars wearing a Corinthian helmet on one side and the head of a horse with the inscription Romano and a grain ear behind. This coinage may have predated the AES grave discussed above, but was minted and used largely in Magna Graecia and Campania. It was clearly part of a broader trend. Payment of Roman and allied troops fighting in the Pyrrhic War appears to have been crucial in spreading the use of Greek-style coinage throughout the southern Apennine areas of Italy. This issue is today thought to have been minted in Neapolis because it was minted on that weight standard, 7.3 grams, not that of Metapontum, Tarentum, and other South Italian cities, which was 7.9 grams at the start of the war, but fell to 6.6 grams during its course. This issue was thought earlier to have been minted in Metapontum because of the grain ear is the most common type of Metapontine coins, and the Mars head is very similar to the head of Leucippus, a local hero, the Messenian king who refounded Metapontum, not the philosopher, on an earlier coin produced there. Now, a number of different coins were minted in increasing volumes over the next few years, but the first silver coin, now thought to have been minted in Rome itself, is the Hercules she-wolf Didrachm. The date of this issue is likely 269 BC. You can see Hercules, he's shown on the obverse, his club, shown undersized above his shoulder, and a lion skin tied around his neck. It was the divine patron of the Fabii. Quintus and his brother, Cnaeus Ogulnius, had, as curule aediles, prosecuted moneylenders. Part of the proceeds were used to set up near the Ficus Ruminalis a statue of Romulus and Remus being suckled by the she-wolf, as shown on the reverse. Some historians believe that these coins were valued at 10 asses, making them denarii. This assertion is based on the account of Pliny in the 1st century AD, where he states that the denarius was introduced in 269 BC. Most historians today, however, do not see this as a denarius, but another didrachm. This last and most other Roman coins were produced in small numbers until the introduction of the didrachma we refer to as the Quadrigatus. The Quadrigatus Didrachm, produced in large quantities starting around 235 BC, was named after the reverse image of victory driving a quadriga, and was produced for about 2 decades, becoming more and more debased to as little as 30% silver during the Second Punic War against Hannibal in the spring of 218 to 201 BC. Now, one of my favorite parts in discussing ancient coinage is trying to figure out the purchasing or the buying power of particular coins of certain denominations throughout the ancient world. Whether it's Greece or Rome, I want to know, what did this coin compensate somebody for in labor? What could it purchase as far as goods and services goes? And it's kind of difficult to do that. Now, I found a source. There's several sources online for the buying power of ancient coinage. In one source, it rings true with me because I'm like most folks. I want to know the number, like an exchange rate to the effect that a denarius was worth, $20 US or $100 US dollars. That's what I want to know. But it's just not that simple. And I'll read what he says. He goes, in the first place, Rome used coins for a period of over 700 years. Think of that, 700 years, 7 centuries. Over that period, ups and downs of inflation and recession operated exactly like they have over the years from 1300 to 2000 AD. We cannot consider ancient Rome as a single time, but have to realize that any answers that apply to the time of Augustus may be totally inappropriate for the same question in the time of Constantine or even Trajan. Prices and wages varied across the empire, with prices in Rome being much different than in a small town in Syria. This is exactly like the situation in modern days, when we see differences in the price of fresh fruit in Florida, New York City, and Alaska. The first problem of all, however, is the fact that there are very few things that were purchased by the average Roman that are still a common item of commerce today. Now, I would say, unless it's like eggs or bread. We can compare food to food, like he says, but we must be very aware that the dietary expectations of days gone by prevent answering questions on the price in denarii of a pepperoni pizza. Surviving records of wages and prices are at best spotty. Wait a minute, though. What about Little Caesar's Pizza? They must have had Little Caesar's back then. That's where it came from. I was sure of that. Just kidding, of course. We have relatively few organized price lists, but have to piece what we know together from the occasional mention in surviving documents. In some cases, this can lead to seeming contradictions, but considering the variations in wages and prices we see from place to place and day to day, today, the Roman monetary structure almost seems stable. Being finished with the disclaimer section, the remainder of this page will look at a few examples of wages and prices that might be of interest. Now, I'm going to read to you here, and I'll actually post them up so you can see them. Now, as we continue on with the article, let me read about this gold Arius here, and we will cover these also later in the future. This gold Arius of Marcus Aurelius was worth 25 silver denarii and would represent a month's pay to a legionary soldier. Gold was probably used mostly for large purchases by the wealthy, with the common man rarely having this much money at one time. So, again, you wouldn't have seen or held a gold Arius if you were in my station, or I'm guessing many of your stations in life, during ancient Rome. And I'm also guessing that's why a lot of these still show up in remarkable condition. They didn't circulate that well. I actually think that held true for most gold coinage throughout human history. And you'll notice that even in the United States, a lot of the gold coins didn't circulate that much because of the amount of wealth they contained. Now, again, this was 25 silver denarii worth of wealth in one coin, and quite rarely did even a person see a handful of denarius during their daily lives in ancient Rome. Now, the Roman diet was very dependent on grain. The average Roman adult male ate 2 pounds of wheat bread each day. While loaves of baked bread were available in the market, most evidence on prices that have come down to us refer to the standard measure for wheat, the modius, about 2 gallons. A modius would bake up into roughly 20 1-pound loaves of bread, so it would provide the needed bread for 10 days. The Roman mind placed importance on a concept of just price, feeling wronged if grain was not available at this price or less. Politicians and those who would be public benefactors could gain considerable status by ensuring the availability of grain in the market, even to the point of buying high-priced grain and reselling it at a loss as a public service. In the early years of coinage, the, quote, just price was about 4 asses per modius. By the time of Caesar, it was 12 asses.
Wait.
Under Nero,
Sorry.
it could be as much as 2 denarii, or 32 asses. These prices are really rather stable when compared to the inflation that the modern world has experienced during the century now ending. These wars of the 3rd century resulted in an end of this stability, frequently raising prices to levels where ordinary workers were reduced to near subsistence levels. Now let's take a look at these 2 coins here. The one on the left, this is a Republican denarius, circa 137 BC. It would have paid a legionary soldier for about 3 days and bought enough wheat to bake his daily bread for nearly a month. So imagine you could live for a month. Your food bills, if all you ate was, daily bread, and it's this one Republican denarius. The one on the right there, that's a 1st century AD Dupondius of Nero. It would have purchased a loaf of pre-baked bread in Pompeii or Rome and 2 loaves in smaller cities in Italy, where prices reflected the simpler lifestyle and lower prices. Now, when we start looking at the real denariuses that I have in possession and doing a video on them, that's the next one coming, by the way, you'll see they're just a little bit bigger than a silver American dime or a pre-64 dime. They're not that large. They don't contain that much silver. And yet, when you look back in the ancient days, that small amount of silver had quite a significant amount of buying power compared to silver today, the modern era. In the Republic, circa 200 to 150 BC, they find records of the pay for a legionary soldier set at around 3 asses per day, and wheat sold for about 4 asses per modius. This would allow a soldier to buy enough bread for a year with about 2 months of pay. The revaluation of the denarius from 10 to 16 asses in 141 BC raised the legionary pay to 5 asses a day, and the price of wheat to a bit over 6 asses per modius. I'm saying asses way too much in this video, and it's actually bothering me.
I feel
How applicable is it to Rome,
the
though?
elementary school child in me is coming out. It is applicable to your degenerate Rome.
By the time of Caesar,
Poor donkey.
By the time of Caesar, a legionary made 10 asses a day, but wheat cost 12 asses a modius. Allowing for local variations, all of these prices remained somewhat proportionate to the wages. During the early empire, a modius would sell for 2 denarii in Rome, but could be had for half that price in the rural parts of Italy, and only 8 asses, or half a denarius, in the breadbasket of Egypt. Baked bread sold for a dupondius, a loaf in the expensive cities like Rome and Pompeii, and half that, 1 as, in more rural towns. By this time, the legionary was earning nearly a denarius a day, but the Praetorian Guard at Rome were paid more partially for their honored position and partly to offset the expense of living in the city. If you compare today's prices for bread at a supermarket, it might suggest that a denarius was worth about $20 US when you look at maybe a loaf of bread being $1 or so. However, this article was written years ago, right before the turn of the last century. And the last time, what was a loaf of bread, Mrs. Maltby? The last time we were at the grocery store, it was about $2, $3, $3 maybe a loaf of bread.
Up to $4.
Up to $4.
If you want fancy seeds on it.
So if you want fancy seeds, so yeah, when you look at what bread a denarius bought back then compared to today, the purchasing power. I mean, if that's what we're using as a comparison, I would say at a minimum, a denarius worth about 20. I mean, they could be worth $30, $40 in buying power today when you look at the amount of bread that it would acquire. Now let's take a look at 2 more coins and continue reading on. This is a denarius of Julia Mesa, 218 AD, approximately a day's pay for a soldier. Military pay was, however, supplemented by donatives of good size paid by emperors to the soldiers responsible for keeping them in power. In many years, these bonuses could exceed the salary. Now, the one on the right, the Antoninius, if I'm pronouncing that properly, let's see, Antoninius of Philip I, 247 AD. This illustrates inflation racing through the 3rd century. While the denomination claims to be worth 2 denarii, the purchasing power was similar to the denarius of a generation earlier. While heavier by 50%, debasement of the alloy left this coin with about the same weight of silver contained in the denarius of the earlier part of the century. So you get that there? What they did is they made the coin bigger, but they put and put the denomination on it as being worth like 2 denarius. However, it only contained the silver of 1 denarii. So it's inflation here. And now the introduction of this, the Antoninius of 214 AD, recognized the fact that a denarius didn't go as far as it had previously. In fact, the buying power of the new coin would just about cover the same purchases that required a denarius a century before. Now, this makes sense to you guys? This is inflation. This is the same stuff that, emperors and governments and kings, this is the same thing they do today. The horrid inflation of the following half century saw the coins debased to a fraction of their earlier values. In 294 AD, an attempt to stabilize the situation was made by Diocletian. he recalled the old coinage and issued a new denomination, now referred to as the nummis, also referred to as phallus on earlier articles. This coin was intended to have the same buying power as had a denarius in the early empire. A farm laborer might make 2 nummi, or nummi, a day, while a craftsman, so like today that would be probably like a computer programmer or someone of higher skills, they would make about as much as 12 of the nummi. Military pay was much more complex, including regular donatives and free grain allowances, as well as the salary. Considering the importance of the army in deciding the life and death of the emperors of the day, it is not hard to understand their wages of over 1,000 nummi a year, partly in the form of free grain. By 305 AD, a modius of wheat sold for about 2 to 10 nummi, depending on the location. So, and Egypt being the cheapest, and Rome was the most expensive. Around 320 AD, we have records of bread selling at Antioch for 2 nummi, a nummus then being the reduced AE3 version. Just a reminder, these nummi, that's just the name of this new coin that was released as, an attempt by Diocletian to curb the inflation, and it obviously it didn't. It was just the essentially circulating as 1-to-1. It was supposed to be the same equivalent as a denarius, but it was not, and you can see that as reflected by these prices here. Now this same record places meat at around 4 to 8 nummi a pound, wine at 6 to 14 in nummi, a sextarius about a pint. So 6 to 14 nummi for about a pint of wine, depending on the quality. Oddly, we could see a parallel here to modern prices if we call a nummus about $1. We have relatively few surviving prices for meat and wine from other periods, but mention is made that the total cost of food for a family of 4 in the Flavian period, late 1st century AD, was 200 denarii a year, or a bit over a dupundius a day per person. This rate would not support eating much beyond home-baked bread, olive oil, and cheap wine. Now let's take a look at these 2 coins here that we have on the screen. The one on the left, it reads, by 320 AD, a loaf of bread might sell for 2 silvered nummi, like this one of Crispus. This sample is midway in size and purchasing power for this denomination, issued first by Diocletian as a large silvered coin, and ending in the Byzantine period as a tiny scrap of copper. Prices followed a similar path, with a modius of wheat worth 2 nummi in 305, selling for 40 nummi in 327. So just, 22 years later, then we see an unbelievable rise in prices. And it correlates with, again, the dilution of the currency, diluting the amount of silver content in a coin. And we're going to cover all this as we go forward and look at more and more Roman coinage. Again, this is kind of an introduction to it all, and using this first Roman coin as kind of our launch pad into looking at just the history of Roman coinage, and of course where it ultimately ended up when the empire began to crumble. If you look at the right coin, we've got this gold solidus. It was not fixed in value in terms of the copper coins. By the time of this solidus of Theodosius, the value could be as much, listen to this, as 7,200 nummi, and could buy 30 to 40 modii of wheat. The daily wage for a cavalryman was then 180 nummi, so a solidus represented the pay for a month and a half. But just incredible. I mean, you look at the amount of gold, how much, well, I guess that's a gold coin, the amount of nummi, which were, they were diluted as time went on from silver to silver-plated bronze and copper. Just the inflation rate there. And of course, the gold maintained its power, its wealth, because it's a gold coin. But as the other currencies were diluted, it took much more of them to make for one of these solidus coins. And then we're going to close. We'll read here. This last section is on some other parts of it. When it comes to clothing, it was relatively expensive. In 240 AD, a pair of army boots sold for 22 denarii, and a heavy cloak suitable for cold weather wear of the highest quality could be as much as 60 denarii. Now, or denarii, however you want to pronounce it. Prices for plain and high quality wool and silk in 305 AD could be as much as 16 nummi and 10 arii a pound, respectively. But the fanciest dyed silks woven with gold threads could be 125 arii, or 3 times the same weight of gold. It becomes clear why such garments were reserved for the emperor and his peers. Thanks for tuning in to another history of coinage lesson here that we both learned together on, because again, like I told you, ancient coinage is new to me. So as I read through all of this, gather the materials, and go coin by coin through history, I'm learning right alongside all of you. Thanks for tuning in, and I hope to see you on the next one. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.